Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight on this Tuesday, August 7th.
We had hoped that there would be really respect for the process, and this isn't respectful of the process.
Why some residents say the Obama Foundation broke its promise to hold off on digging into Jackson Park until all permits were secured. The Department of Homeland Security reports Russian-backed hackers have infiltrated the U.S. power grid. We assess the threat. Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan and his organization under scrutiny once again, this time involving a volunteer who's been charged with murder. A judge blocks the release of blueprints for 3D printed guns. Reasonable regulation or a violation of the First Amendment?
Because of the stability of the talented people who lived in Mecca, blacks began to organize.
Unearthing an old Mecca for black Chicagoans. An inside look at Northwestern's $270 million athletic center with architecture critic Blair Cabin. And a look at Modern Art Museum in Ukrainian Village. All that and more next on Chicago Tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Phil Ponce. More cops on Chicago's streets. Brandis Friedman has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Brandis.
And Phil, in response to a recent increase in violence, the Chicago Police Department says it's putting more cops on the streets. Superintendent Eddie Johnson says police officers working afternoons and overnights will have their shifts extended because those times tend to be the most active. Johnson told reporters he's canceling days off for certain units like tactical and gang teams in the higher crime districts. The superintendent says he's doing it all without pulling manpower from other districts.
We have a responsibility to taxpayers to manage overtime efficiently. So the bulk of this, we are down right now about 30% in terms of overtime usage compared to last year. So let me just put that out there. So we're way down in terms of overtime use. This initiative that we're doing now, the bulk of it will come from resources that are not on overtime. So the overtime piece of it is very minute.
And the top-tier crime districts that Johnson says will be receiving this extra coverage, they're on your screen. Altogether, there will be an additional 430 officers at work this week and an additional 600 this weekend. And less than a week after the march that shut down part of Lakeshore Drive as a response to violence, two of the event's organizers are parting ways. Today, Violence Interrupters Director and former candidate for Governor Tio Hardeman says he disapproves of Reverend Gregory Livingston's plans to repeat the march, this time on the Kennedy Expressway leading to O'Hare Airport on Labor Day weekend. Livingston says he wants to follow in the steps of Martin Luther King Jr. and believes that going to jail will help prove their point about violence. Hardeman has been on the record as being opposed to trying to get arrested and sent to jail. Both men say they are still in the planning stages of their next respective separate anti-violence actions. And hockey fans are mourning the loss of a legend, Stan Mikita. The Blackhawks announced Mikita's death today, saying that he was with family at the time. His health had deteriorated after being diagnosed with an illness called Lewy body dementia. Mikita played 22 seasons with the team and is the franchise leader in assists, points, and games played. Mikita tallied 541 goals, trailing only teammate and friend Bobby Hull. Mikita became the first player to have his jersey retired by the Blackhawks back in 1980 and was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame 3 years later. Stan Mikita was 78 years old, and you can see Phil Ponce's 2011 interview with Mikita on our website. As for the weather, a chance of showers tonight, otherwise mostly cloudy with a low around 66. Then patchy fog for the morning commute before becoming partly sunny and a high near 84. And even when you're out of town on summer vacation, you never have to miss Chicago Tonight. You can always watch by streaming on Facebook, via podcast, and the PBS video app, as well as online at WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight. Now, Phil, back to you.
Thank you, Brandis. The Obama Presidential Center could be uprooting a long-held promise it made to the community. Some community groups are speaking out today after construction equipment was seen removing trees and digging up the field on the southern end of Jackson Park. They say the Obama Foundation has jumped the gun on construction, which has received pushback from some park preservationists. Paris Schutz has the latest. Paris, what's going on?
Phil, these groups, not to be cute here, but it's not just the trees that have been uprooted. They say it's the trust that's been uprooted in the community. Groups like Jackson Park Watch and the Cultural Landscape Foundation. That's because, as the Sun-Times reported this morning, construction crews have been all over Jackson Park on the south end there near 63rd and Stony Island, ripping up softball diamonds that were there and uprooting trees that had been there for decades. Now, the groups say the foundation had promised not to remove any trees until it had gotten all of its federal and local permits and approval. Mind you, the project is also facing a lawsuit on the grounds that it should not be built in protected park space, even though Chicago City Council has approved this whole project. Now, Jackson Park Watch's Margaret Schmidt says she believes the foundation has made a big mistake in its move to begin construction.
I think if there are questions about whether we can really trust, whether the community can really trust what's going on here, how about trust in terms of things like the job commitments that the Obama Foundation has made? How about things about the traffic promises, that their traffic plans would be wonderful and not cause any problems? It really raises all kinds of issues, and I think it's really very sad to have to introduce that kind of issue into this already controversial situation.
So what is the Obama Center's explanation for starting early?
Spokespeople for the Obama Foundation say that this field is not technically part of the planned Obama Presidential Center, as you see there. But because the building will partially cover existing high school track and field space, the center is paying to move that track and field south to that part of the park that they're constructing right now. And they're footing the bill for this as part of the agreement. They say it'll be bigger and better than the current track and field that exists. A spokesperson said, while the track and field of Jackson Park is not on the Obama presidential site, the Obama Foundation offered to fund the construction of the new track to ensure continuity of access to the track for the community. The construction schedule put forward by the Chicago Park District ensures that the new track will be ready for students and fall sports leagues. In terms of uprooting these trees, Phil, the Chicago Park District says 40 have been removed, but they say 11 were already dead. The other 29, they say, will be replaced once construction here is finished. Quote, "We are pleased that the Obama Foundation has partnered with the Chicago Park District to fund the construction of the track and field. The new 8-lane, 400-meter track and field allows for an improved amenity for the community in the form of a wider turf field to accommodate an expanded soccer program." But Margaret Schmidt says she's not buying these arguments.
We had hoped that there would be really respect for the process, and this isn't respectful of the process, and that is really just too bad and does not lend itself to smooth sailing. The Obama legacy is really not helped with this kind of behavior.
So it's a debate over semantics here, Phil. The Obama Foundation did say it would not start construction or remove any trees until it had all its ducks in a row, but they say this isn't technically part of the Obama Presidential Center. Groups like you saw there say that's not true because they are uprooting this track and field. This project is part of the Obama Presidential Center.
Paris, thank you. And now to Eddie Aruza and the increasing threat of cyber attacks to the nation's utilities. Eddie.
Phil, a lot of attention has been given to foreign agents attacking U.S. election systems. And you may recall the Illinois State Board of Election was one of several targets in 2016. But another serious cyber threat has emerged. Recently, the Department of Homeland Security made an alarming announcement that Russian-backed hackers infiltrated the control rooms of hundreds of utility companies in the U.S. What that infiltration may actually cause is debated among cybersecurity experts. But what is not in question is that the U.S. energy grid does have a number of vulnerabilities that could be targeted. And with us tonight to give us their assessment of the threats are Jacob First. professor in the College of Computing and Digital Media at DePaul University, where he lectures on cybersecurity issues. And Karen Weigert, senior fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, where she has written extensively on issues of grid security. She was previously Chief Sustainability Officer for the city of Chicago. Welcome to Chicago tonight to both of you.
Thank you.
Jacob, first give me your reaction to the Department of Homeland Security revelation.
No real surprise. This has been going on for a while. The U.S. has known about the danger to our infrastructure for many years. In 2017, Symantec published a rather extensive report about what they had found in their various investigations. And
Symantec being the security
company. Sure. And while they didn't absolutely point the finger at Russia, there were already some indications that these were probably Russian attacks.
So it has been known for a while that there was this infiltration, or just the threat was there?
In 2017, at least a year ago now, there was evidence of infiltration. So not just this. The understanding about vulnerabilities has been, probably 10 years at least, that the United States has really started looking seriously at infrastructure protection.
So Karen Weigert, when you hear about this infiltration that apparently the Department of Homeland Security is verifying, what does it signify to you?
It's another step in an ongoing challenge. And the importance of electricity seems to grow every day, but the grid wasn't designed to be national defense, and now it has to be. And so essentially we're looking at the system that we rely on, that cities rely on, that individuals and businesses more or less can't live without. And we have to essentially retrofit that system. We have to figure out how to ensure that the front line of national defense is now embedded in the front line of our energy system. And absolutely, the grid and electricity and energy have been the most attacked parts of critical infrastructure for the last few years. This is another step forward. But the good thing is we're having this conversation without the electricity having gone out.
So ComEd and Ameren are the two biggest providers of electricity in Illinois. There are some smaller companies. Now, I don't know if you had any insights while you were at the city, or you might now, in terms of their vulnerability or the steps that they've taken to prevent cyber attacks. But can you tell us anything about the utilities in Illinois?
Well, I think the broad opportunity here is that Illinois has actually moved pretty rapidly in terms of modernizing the grid. There were multiple challenges of blackouts before, not driven by cyber, but driven by other challenges. And the grid is really modernized with the smart grid implementation and smart meter implementation. So in many ways, Illinois has moved rapidly and has, in a sense, done a bit of a leapfrog to get ahead on the technology. And that has to be married with the cyber controls. So we have to ensure that we're continuing to have the regulated space, ensure that these organizations can deliver and that they, in fact, are asking for the funds they're going to need to ensure that we're all safe.
And funds from the federal government?
This is a regulated industry. So ultimately, it tends to come from ratepayers. That's us. But there are multiple regulatory structures on top of the grid. The part that covers us where we sit in the city is the distribution side. That's mostly regulated by the state.
So Jacob, first, besides switching, flipping the switch, as the Department of Homeland Security says, what would happen, or what is the objective of these cyber attacks?
Yes, so that's probably a better question for a political scientist, right? The way I see it is this is sort of the natural jockeying for position and power between two large countries in the global environment. As Karen said, there hasn't been, the lights are still on, so there haven't been actual successful attacks negotiated, but a whole lot of positioning, right? So Russia compromising trusted vendors and third-party suppliers, collecting credentials for potential attacks. Nothing may come of it, right? And we may see, if relations between the two countries deteriorate, we may actually see this become part of our a national strategy against us.
There's word out there that it's not so much an attack on the technology as in people, or in, as you said, third-party vendors that somehow might create havoc. Can you just give us a little bit more about that?
So what's sort of remarkable about this particular campaign is that the attackers seem to be using no zero-day exploits, which is a purely technical attack, right? A vulnerability but that nobody knows about, and there's something broken in the machine, you take advantage of it. This seems to be purely social engineering. So things like spear phishing attacks, targeted email attacks to get people to download invisible images that authenticate against an attacker's server. Mentioned the water holing, which is another social engineering attack. You compromise a website that industrial control people would go to, right? A trade site or something like that. And again, you insert this image. When they download the page, request for that image goes to an attacker server. So no actual purely technical attacks, just social engineering.
So Karen Weigert, the biggest cyber attack on a utility, on an electrical grid at least, happened in 2015 in the Ukraine. It impacted about 250,000 people. The electricity went out, and it was thought that that was kind of a dress rehearsal by perhaps these same foreign agents, Kremlin-backed foreign agents. What came of that, or what was learned about that?
Yeah, that's the scenario people are worried about. Now, a key thing there is it was Western Ukraine, and it was very short. There was a second attack a year later, also in Ukraine. And part of what was learned is between that first attack and the second is the level of sophistication of the cyber criminals or cyber hackers increased. And they were able to target different parts of the grid. Again, that second attack was also short. That was in Kiev. So I think this is what people are looking at. And when we're thinking about how do you prevent that, there actually was stealing of credentials. That is a part of the hygiene in terms of protecting ourselves. But the attackers were in these systems for months before they actually took down parts of the grid. So it's a long campaign with a sophisticated attack.
The grid in the United States is an interconnected patchwork of small and big companies. As I mentioned, there's at least 4 here in Illinois. So they all have to kind of work together and independently to make sure that the grid is safe from these kinds of attacks. Is that happening to the best of your knowledge, Jacob Furst?
I'm reasonably optimistic, right? As I said, the United States has been aware of the vulnerabilities here and has been working. The bulletin that DHS published includes very detailed steps about the kinds of attacks you can expect, the kinds of things you can do to protect yourself. These are, in general, best practices anyway. The utility companies are taking the steps necessary to protect themselves, and just to drop a line here, right? Squirrels are still a greater danger to our infrastructure than the Russians, at least so far as we've seen.
So you feel, not that this is overblown, but that there are vulnerabilities, but it's not that much of an impact as natural disasters, or as you're terming it, squirrels. Biting maybe through a cable or something.
There are always vulnerabilities. There will always be vulnerabilities, especially if people are involved in the system. The work that we have to do is to shore up those vulnerabilities as best we can, and the evidence I've seen is that we are doing that.
Karen Weigert, there are many things that can happen if the electricity goes out that put people in peril. But we have other utilities. There's water and there's gas utilities. And certainly if the water system of a municipality, a large municipality or several municipalities, is targeted in somehow, preventing water from being purified and sent out, that could pose an even greater problem. Is there any suggestion, any ideas out there that maybe those utilities also are vulnerable and need to take extra steps?
Well, certainly there have been attacks also against water utilities from the cyber perspective. And one of the interplays here is that the electric grid is supplying those water treatment plants. So in a sense, you have a cascade internal if you have the power going out, depending on whether or not the other parts of infrastructure themselves are protected. So it's a really integrated system. And yes, there are growing cyber threats across the challenge. It's multiple sectors. And one thing that is really interesting is executives are raising this as a higher threat issue in their own polling. Like, what do they care about in the utility space? Cyber is rising. It's also rising as an issue for the American public. I think we see now and read about cyber in multiple places. And the question is, how do we ensure that we're taking the steps so that our cities are safe, our residents are safe, and how do we stay ahead of what is a fast-moving game?
And what needs to happen? Is it stronger regulation? Is it more laws? Is it an increase in rates? What do you think, Jacob, first?
I need more students.
Okay.
The demand
to make sure that there are security professionals out there.
Right. The demand for qualified professionals just seems insatiable, and it takes time and effort and training, education to get people qualified, and we just don't seem to be able to do that.
Is there a way to not always be on the defense, but rather the offense here? And that's not to say that we should target, be the foreign power that targets other countries, but it's not really just Russia. I mean, North Korea and Iran have attacked our country or companies in China as well in different ways. So is there any way to get ahead of the curve here?
Not really, right? So unless you're attacking, right, it's hard to anticipate what kind of attacks are going to come. And so if you want to be a good world citizen, right, what you do is you defend what you have. And while you can do some, right, exercises, training, whatever, for attack, unless you're actually out there, it's hard to know what's coming down the pike.
Training more professionals, I guess, is what you're saying at this point.
That's what I'm saying.
Jacob First and Karen Weingart, thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
And there's much more Chicago Tonight just ahead, so please stay with us.
Still to come on Chicago Tonight, 3D printed gun blueprints are already available online. Can the government regulate them? Construction on the Illinois Institute of Technology campus unearths a slice of Chicago's buried past. Chicago architect Gene Gang's new environmentally conscious Hyde Park Apartments tower wows architecture critic Blair Kamen. And kinetic sculpture and more at a contemporary art museum in Ukrainian village. But first, Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan and his organization are under scrutiny once again. A Southwest suburban man has been charged with murder, but before that, that man, Michael Pelko, was involved in a push to unseat House Minority Leader Jim Durkin, allegedly with the help of Madigan's top aides. Joining us now are the WBEZ reporters on that story, state politics reporters Dave McKinney and Tony Arnold. Dave and Tony, welcome back to Chicago Tonight. Dave, let me begin with you because the story begins in July 2017 and a man named Izzat Morar is found dead in an alley with 2 shots to the head. Who do police arrest?
Well, Pelko is the man that they bring in for questioning, and he's brought in July 17, and they release him without any sort of charges at that point. And so he goes back to his life in the southwest suburbs. He's a Little League coach, business owner, seemingly upstanding citizen, and decides he wants to get involved in politics. And then that's when, you know, he meets this candidate who the Democrats seem to like a great deal out there, a LaGrange school board member.
Tony Arnold, tell us more about this candidate. Her name is Elyse Hoffenberg. Why did Democrats decide they wanted to get behind her?
Well, because they really wanted to take a big swing at Jim Durkin, the House Republican leader, the House Minority Leader, the most powerful Republican in the Illinois House of Representatives. And Democrats haven't taken a real big swing at him in years, 8 years really, that he's been unopposed in the November election. So Elyse Hoffenberg's a school board member. She's a mom. She lives there and decides, I want to take a shot at this. I want to go run for state representative against Durkin. And
state Democrats see her as a potential up-and-comer. So, Dave, Michael Pelko comes back into the picture. He shows up at a campaign launch for Elyse Hoffenberg in last September. And what does he tell her?
Well, he basically says, I'm going to make you a star. He says that he can help her round up thousands of petition signatures that she needs to get on the ballot, that he's prepared to go to the hilt. He knows everybody in the district. And so she came away feeling pretty unsettled by this because the guy seemed grandiose. And you know, after that point, he disappeared. Never heard anything back from him. And so then, you know, we fast forward to December, and there's an unexpected candidate that shows up in the ballot. Besides her, and that's when Pelko reemerges.
And so this unexpected candidate, a Democrat who's challenging her to take on Durkin, happens in December of last year. And State Senator Steve Landek recommends Michael Pelko to file an election board complaint against Elyse Durkin. Why did Landek choose Michael Pelko?
Well, as Pelko has expressed an interest in getting involved in politics, as Landek told us, he seemed like an okay guy. But it turns out, he says later on, that he feels like he's been duped because Pelko ends up getting arrested and charged for murder a little bit later. This process for challenging petitions, you know, think of it this way. What's the best way to win an election? It's to run unopposed. And so there's this thing that campaigns do where they try to kick the opponent off. And so this is really a fight with among the Democrats between Elyse Hoffenberg and then her Democratic opponent, Tom Klistick.
Because, Dave, as Tony just said, all of a sudden that murder charge, that murder where Michael Pelko had been investigated, all of a sudden he's charged. And 2 weeks later, Madigan's top electoral lawyer, a guy named, well-known lawyer named Michael Casper, asked the state election board to withdraw the complaint that he had filed against the other candidate who was challenging Elyse Hoffenberg. And tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of moving pieces here, but the challenge is withdrawn after Pelko gets into another bit of trouble. He's not quite charged yet with the murder, but he gets involved in this altercation, an alleged shoplifting incident out in Will County, where he tries to go out of a Menards with a cart full of goods. And when someone tries to stop him, a security guard, allegedly Pelko gets in his car and strikes him with the vehicle. So when that happens, a few days or a week or so later, then the complaint is withdrawn, and then we go about another couple of weeks, and Pelko is charged then with the murder that he was investigated for again. And Hoffenberg sees that, and she's like, "This is unsettling."
Unsettling, because just to amplify slightly, did Michael Casper, Madigan's top election attorney, know who Michael Pelko was when he, Casper, was helping Pelko challenge that other Democrat?
Casper told us no, he didn't know him. This is kind of a typical, again, a thing that campaigns do. They look for somebody from the district, somebody local, to challenge the candidacy of somebody else. And in this case, Landeck, the state senator from around Lyons Township, recommended Pelko, again saying that he felt like he was duped because he didn't know what Pelko would end up being charged with.
So, long story short, the Democratic Party appears to have enlisted somebody who's now charged with murder to help them knock off a candidate who's running against someone that the state Democratic Party wants to run unopposed. What did state Democratic officials say about this attempt using Michael Pelko?
Well, I mean, the spokesman for Mike Madigan told us that the state Democratic Party didn't get involved in petition challenges, but there are so many different mechanisms, and all that mattered was the paper trail that had all of Madigan's, several of his key aides involved in this challenge. So, you know, we kind of know that. It's a black eye. It's sort of a self-inflicted wound on Madigan's political organization, and there have been quite a few of those of late.
Well, Michael Casper is the attorney, one of Madigan's top attorneys who helped Michael Pelko. What did he say when he was questioned about why he had been working with Michael Pelko?
Well, he said that Pelko was recommended to him and referred to him, but he didn't remember who did it, how his interaction with him went. He said that he hadn't ever really talked or known Pelko, similar to what Madigan says. Pelko's never been a part of his organization, never been a part of the Democratic Party of Illinois, or much of anything like that.
So back to the point you were making, Dave, about how this has not come at a good time for Michael Madigan. Why not?
Well, no, I mean, he's had to clean house in his political organization. I mean, a top aide, Timothy Mapes, was pushed out. I mean, he had bullying allegations and harassment allegations brought against him by an underling. And then earlier we saw another kind of, key operative in his ward, and he was hit with sexual harassment allegations, and so it comes at a sensitive time for Madigan, where of course he's being singled out in the gubernatorial campaign. Rauner is hitting him repeatedly, and so this is again just it's a bit of an embarrassment.
And the so what factor is?
The so what factor is that there are literally in all these campaigns hundreds upon hundreds of campaign volunteers who go door to door trying to get people's signatures and the such, and there's very little vetting that gets done of these people. And in this case, had someone simply said, "Have you been arrested before? Have you been convicted of a felony or anything like that?" It probably would have, made this problem go away.
So that's an issue that people continue to deal with. And that is a volunteer who's working for a candidate. That candidate doesn't really know if that person comes with a clean slate.
That's right, and I think, again, with this situation, we're talking about the Madigan organization, that it's been very tight-knit for a very long time, and we're starting to see some threads get pulled a little bit in a few different ways.
Dave McKinney, Tony Arnold, thank you both for being here. Very much appreciate it. Thanks, Phil. And up next, a legal question behind printing your own 3D gun at home.
This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by ComEd, powering lives.
There's a shortage of women in STEM because there aren't enough opportunities. ComEd wants to change that, one program at a time, celebrating Women's History Month with the Icebox Derby. Building confidence, building bright minds, building the workforce of the future.
A federal judge last week blocked the release of blueprints for 3D printed plastic guns just hours before they were set to be made available. Those blueprints would potentially allow anyone with a 3D printer to make an untraceable, unregulated gun at home. The case raises First and Second Amendment questions, and it may be legal wrangling over something of a moot point. Despite the judge's order, blueprints that is, for 3D printed guns are already available online. Joining us with more on the logistical and legal questions at play are Harold Krent, Dean of the Chicago-Kent College of Law at IIT, and Matthew Spenko, Associate Professor at IIT's Armory College of Engineering and head of its robotics lab. And gentlemen, welcome to Chicago Tonight. Matthew Spenko, just give a brief explainer around what a 3D printer does, how it works for people who aren't familiar with it.
It's very similar to an inkjet printer that spits out a little bit of ink onto a piece of paper. Instead, 3D printer spits out a little bit of hot plastic. And as that plastic cools, it's able to sort of build up a part. The 3D part of it is that think of the paper moving away from the nozzle as the part is being built up.
And you can print just about anything what do you need to do something like this?
Well, we use it a lot in our lab to build up prototypes for a lot of our robots, so it's very useful for us. A lot of hobbyists use it to build little trinkets or knickknacks, so it's a wide variety of uses. But you need a blueprint, and no matter what you're making, you need a blueprint for it. You need instructions that tell the machine what to build, and either you do that yourself or you can have somebody else make those instructions for you. Or you can download them if they're available. Exactly. All right, Harold, give us a thumbnail of the legal wrangling that led to the judge's order last week.
Well, to take a step back, the lawsuit stemmed from the fact that this organization, Defense Distributed, wanted to post these CAD files or computer-assisted designs online. They had to get a license from the federal government that regulates potential trafficking in arms that can be accessible to anybody abroad. And the government said no. And so they sued under the First Amendment, saying that you can't block these designs. It's legal to download a gun at home. Where is the threat to international security? And the State Department wrangled with them over a period of years, but then settled the case suddenly and unexpectedly just a couple of months ago. And let me interrupt you for a second. And just to clarify, it's the State Department that was engaged with this company that wanted to print it because the State Department is concerned with terrorism and international access to weapons or access to weapons domestically of people who might want to do harm to the United States. Well, it's more the former, and the State Department has bans all sorts of technology transfers in order to preserve our national security, and this was in that same vein. But when they settled, all of a sudden, they could be published. So it turns out that 19 attorneys general then agreed to band together to sue to prevent to challenge this settlement and say you should not release these files, even though, as you mentioned earlier, these files had been downloaded about 100,000 times already. And so far, the first plank of this lawsuit has gone in favor of the attorneys general, and the judge so far has issued a temporary restraining order that said, until we can look at this in more depth, we will prevent the release of these files, even though, again, many people already have access to them.
So, Matthew Spenko, how long have these 3D printer plans been available that people can have access to?
It's been about 5 years, I think.
And what kinds of plans are out there? For what kinds of weapons?
So you can print a handgun. There's a type of handgun that you can print out there. There's also parts for what's called a lower for an AR-15. And so you can 3D print those, and there's also other techniques where you can build your own lower for these AR-15 guns and other guns.
And you say that you can also use a pre-programmed CNC mill. What is that?
So a CNC mill is a computer numerically controlled milling machine. A milling machine, think of that almost like a drill, except that it can take out material not just by going down into the material, but also going sideways into the material. And you can buy a $1,500 pre-programmed CNC mill that will, without any knowledge on your part, you press a button and it will automatically mill out a lower for an AR-15.
And what's a lower?
A lower is part of the gun that you would sort of think of it as sort of the heart of the gun, where all other parts get connected to. And this is the part of the gun where you would typically find a serial number on. And so by building your own lower, you can now own a gun without any sort of serial number. It doesn't have to be registered. It's what's referred to as a ghost gun.
I see. Harold, did we? I'm not sure if you answered her. If we addressed the whole First Amendment thing, is this protected by the First Amendment? Whether somebody can, it's my right to disseminate this information. I'm not trying to make a profit off of it. I just want to share it.
And it's not inciting for anybody to break the law because it's perfectly legal currently to make a gun at home. Obviously, there are laws in states that say certain individuals can't possess guns. People who have been convicted of felonies, people who have a protective order against them, people who have been determined to be mentally ill, but everybody else can possess a gun. So you can make a gun at home, and there's no federal law or state law that prohibits it. So it's a pretty strong First Amendment claim in this case.
How about the Second Amendment?
Well, the Second Amendment would arise if the government tried to regulate this directly. If they passed a law saying all guns at least have to be registered. Congress did pass a law in 1988 saying that each gun could have to be recognizable in a security line, for instance, at the airport. Otherwise, it is illegal. So if you take this metal part off of this plastic gun and it won't trigger the airport security, that would be in violation of a federal law currently. That's why Defense Distributed put a metal part in the design of the gun so it would be consistent with the pre-existing congressional law.
Matthew, my understanding is that there are some aspects of the gun, of the plastic gun, that are not great, that there are some structural flaws. What are they?
Typically what you'll find with most guns that have plastic parts is they'll at least have the barrel made out of metal. There have been, there's proof out there on the internet. You can see some of these plastic guns being shot. There's also other videos of people trying to shoot these guns and having these guns explode on them because the plastic is not strong enough to shoot the projectile out of the gun. There are numerous issues in terms of tolerancing on these parts. There's a lot of warping that goes on.
But eventually, might all that, quote, be fixed and improved?
Definitely.
And so, so what's the takeaway here, Harold?
The takeaway is we don't have a great way to regulate ownership of guns currently. Right now, people that aren't allowed to possess guns can get guns from friends, from relatives, from the black market, and this is just another way to challenge our current regulatory terrain. So what we need to do is think about how we can have other mechanisms to ensure that the guns don't get in wrong hands, and that we have failed to do so far.
Harold Trent, Matthew Spenko, thank you both for being here. Very much appreciate it. Construction on the Illinois Institute of Technology campus recently exposed a slice of Chicago's buried past, and our Amanda Vinicky brings it to life.
A literal architectural crown, Mies van der Rohe's SR Crown Hall, stands in its glassy modern glory on the campus of the Illinois Institute of Technology. The SR Crown Hall replaced what's come to be viewed as another architectural masterpiece, the Mecca.
We stand here today to really properly remember that confluence of events and to pledge to engage our neighbors and our friends here in Bronzeville much more gracefully.
Recently uncovered from the old Mecca site, a fork, a harmonica, a marble, as well as mosaics and other tiles that helped to make the Mecca a marvel. The Mecca was built in 1891. It was meant as a hotel when Chicago hosted the World's Fair. Instead, the 4-story U-shaped brick building was converted to apartments.
The way of creating density and also doing the opposite, which is to create a landscape, to preserve a landscape as part of urban living, is an amazing accomplishment, and it started with the Mecca building.
Its style helped it to become not just a building, but a renowned community for Chicago's African Americans.
It has a history of the nurturing of talent because of the security that existed.
The community was essentially ripped up with the Mecca's demolishment, but its admirers hope the unearthed remains of the past will resurface, and not just in the permanent exhibition IIT plans.
That's in some ways a more important lesson than the masterwork of Crown Hall, you know, with its structural expressionism, its clean scientific surface. This is a more important lesson, and that is how to use architecture to build community.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Amanda Vinicky.
Bluestone says the Mecca's courtyard concept is one of the greatest contributions to the history of housing. On Monday, IIT plans to launch a fundraising campaign so it can conserve remnants of the Mecca. And for more on the story, you can visit our website. Northwestern University officially opens its new $270 million athletic facility on the Evanston lakefront. Gene Gang's new environmentally conscious apartment building in Hyde Park shines, and a new way to appreciate, of all things, jury duty. Here with those stories is the Chicago Tribune's Pulitzer Prize-winning architecture critic, Blair Kamen. Blair, good to see you.
Good to be here, Phil.
Okay, so we mentioned this new athletic facility at Northwestern cost $270 million. What does $270 million get you these days?
Well, it buys you a facility with an extraordinary indoor practice field that overlooks Lake Michigan, and all kinds of other facilities, a 2-story dining hall for athletes, coaches' offices that have views of the Chicago skyline. And it's kind of like, people call it the Fitz Mahal.
The Fitz Mahal, after the coach?
After the coach, yes.
But you say it's a distinguished, sometimes breathtaking work of architecture. What about it qualifies for those wonderful adjectives?
Well, the indoor practice facility is really which you're seeing here is really the best part of the building. This is real structural drama by Perkins & Will, the firm that designed it. And it's these tremendous arches that span about 240 feet across the field. There's a 44-foot curtain of glass that looks out over Lake Michigan. So, I mean, it really takes advantage of its site. And it's funny, Phil, I was there last Saturday night for a walk, and when you see it at night, it just is this incredible beacon. All that structure is visible from the outside looking in. It's not just impressive from the inside looking out.
So where does this put Northwestern in terms of the quality of their athletic facilities?
Well, I have not seen every Jock Taj Mahal in the country, but people from Yahoo Sports have, and they say that this puts Northwestern at the head of the pack.
Is that right?
Which is, you know, not where you would have expected Northwestern, the doormat of Big Ten football, to be as recently as, 25 or 30 years ago.
And the whole point of this is recruitment, you would think?
It's recruitment, it's efficiency. They don't have to travel to Ryan Field, their practice facility, about 1.5 miles to the northwest. It's trying to integrate more with the campus, although there's some tension there because the building's kind of like a parallel universe. It has its own dining hall and study center for athletes, so there's some tension there. And even as transparent as it looks, it's designed in some ways to ward off spies from other football teams. That's why the practice field is up on the 2nd floor. So people from Ohio State, Notre Dame, Michigan, Iowa, et cetera, can't look in and say, here's what Northwestern is doing next Saturday.
Let's move on to the other part of the Chicago area in Hyde Park. I drove by this building a couple of weeks ago, and it just kind of took my breath away. Tell us about Gene Gang's new building in Hyde Park.
Well, this is called Solstice on the Park, and it's a 250-unit apartment building. And as you can see, it has a really dramatic south-facing facade. The key element in this building is the fact that these windows, south-facing windows, are tilted diagonally at a 72-degree angle. That is the angle of the sun on the day of the summer solstice. The idea behind that is to shield the interior of units from the blaring, blistering sun. And during wintertime, to allow the low-lying sun to come into the units and passively warm apartments. And the idea is to save energy. So what this building does is it takes that energy-saving rationale, which is important but kind of prosaic, and it turns it into a kind of muscular visual poetry. This building really has beautiful contrast between its elements. It has wonderful rhythms as it grows upward, kind of like a flower or a tree. And so it's really strong stuff.
Does it affect it? Does that design, the way those windows are angled, does it affect the design of the interior? I would suspect it does.
Yeah,
would.
it chews up a little bit of interior space, but it compensates with, you get more glass because instead of the glass being flat, it's a little bit longer. So you get these wonderful expansive views out to the Museum of Science and Industry, Jackson Park, the Arc of the Lake, going south to the steel mills. It's wonderful stuff. And then there are balconies as well, which you could have a dinner party on.
Oh, the balconies are generous, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of generous, so are the
so are the prices.
So are the prices.
Well, so it's 1 to 3 bedrooms. They range in price from $2,000 to $5,300, which ain't cheap.
Is that the going rate now for?
Well, for an expensive 3-bedroom, yeah.
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 Oh, all right.
Maybe U of C professors, or can afford that. I don't know. But,
all right. Well, listen, you were called to jury duty recently, and that's something that that can be an interruption in somebody's work life. It's an important civic duty.
Yeah.
But you were able to sort of combine the two. What did you do?
I was on a 3-day jury at the Daley Center, and you know what? I was really pleased at the experience just as a citizen. It was great to interact with other people, but most importantly, it gave me a new chance to appreciate the architecture. So you can see the muscular, rusting steel exterior, so incredibly structurally expressive, the Daley Center, matching the Picasso, the great plaza outside, which reinterprets the traditional role of a courthouse as a kind of civic square. But what really got me was the interior experience. The tall glass windows of the lobby, the incredible views that you see from the outside that kind of that soothe you after you've heard like hours and hours of mind-numbing testimony. And then the courtrooms themselves are very intimately arranged. So there's a kind of a dialogue between the jury, the judge, and the parties. They're stark, and yet they have this kind of semi-religious atmosphere, and God we trust.
They look like temples in a way.
Yes.
You know, if you step back, it does look like a very spare temple.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, they reminded me in some ways of Mies van der Rohe's God Box, the sort of the chapel at IIT. The Daley Center, though, was designed by Jack Brownson from C.F. Murphy and 2 other Chicago firms, Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, Lobel, Schlossman, Hackle. Or Lobel, Schlossman and Bennett, I should say. It's a really distinguished building. It's held up wonderfully, and I think a lot of people take it for granted. You know, it's just like where you go for jury duty. It's where lawyers and judges go. But once you experience it from the inside, which is really how you should experience a building and judge it, it holds up really well.
And not just architecturally, but you say it has an impact on your state of mind. And what is that? What is that impact?
The impact is it brings you into community with the other jurors and the people you're judging. And it also communicates the seriousness of being on a jury. When we walked into the jury room, there was like a 12-foot high solid oak door. And it was like, entering into like, I don't know, some medieval castle or something. I mean, it's sort of like thunk. you know, this like, you better not mess around here. This is serious stuff.
And the judge talked to you about the architecture afterwards. What did the judge say?
The judge was Thomas Moore Donnelly, a wonderful judge, very warm and personable, and he pointed out things like, you know, the purity of the international style, and how the jury box was set directly across from the contesting parties to kind of create this dialogue, you know, between the jury, which he was really saying was, you know, the jury has the power. They're the ones judging. And so it was really set up to be very intimate and to enforce the idea of citizenship, and it really did. I mean, my fellow jury members were terrific people, and we all, it sounds really corny, but we all emerged with just a renewed faith in the system. It was, you know, it was great. It was really a wonderful experience.
Blair Kamen, thank you so much. Appreciate you being here, as always. Picture Ukrainian art, and you might think of embroidered dresses, traditional pottery, or even decorated Easter eggs. But a jewel of a museum in Chicago's Ukrainian Village has emphasized contemporary art for more than 40 years. We visited the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art for a look at its past and its future. Founded in 1971, the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art now resides behind a facade designed by Chicago architect Stanley Tigerman. Inside, a new exhibition looks at the art and legacy of the founding fathers of the museum. There are kinetic sculptures set in motion with a gentle touch. There are imposing oil paintings. And there are works that are just plain playful. The artwork represents the fierce creativity of a colorful group of characters.
They were brave-hearted and dedicated to their muse. Not so many people know that Ukraine has produced so many talented people, and especially in art. And they were not just, as people would call, classical art, but also modernist and experimentalist. And so they actually wanted to show that Ukrainians are very diverse and very different and very creative. They wanted to show that they also have their own talents, abilities, and they're not afraid to show it.
They were founders Konstantin Milonadis and Mikhailo Orban, a pair of Ukrainian-born artists and friends who served in the U.S. Army and used the GI Bill to attend the School of the Art Institute. They founded the museum with the help of a family doctor dedicated to art.
At the very beginning, these two artists, they did a colossal work, organizing little exhibits here and there, reaching out to young artists, at first of Ukrainian roots. And we represent, for more than 46 years, artists of all roots and backgrounds. Nobody's checking on DNA. It's all about art. So the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art is teaching about experimental, innovative forms of art in all medias. Yes, they were very intelligent people, very educated, self-educated too, besides going through universities. They're also very spiritual, and they were constantly looking for answers.
The founders may have been non-traditionalist, but they still had the faith of the community.
Sometime attending their exhibits, some people perhaps didn't understand their art because it was somewhat minimalistic or not very easily recognizable, like people accustomed to, oh, it's a tree, or this is a horse, or this is a sunflower, this is art, right? It was modern and contemporary and experimental in a way, but a lot of these people from the community, those prominent people who had stable, steady jobs, engineers, doctors, medics, so they wanted to support them, even though sometimes maybe they didn't understand or didn't agree with certain things with them.
Also on view, woodcuts that probably would not offend a staunch traditionalist, and a historic work by the noted avant-garde artist Alexander Archipenko, who exhibited his artwork in the Ukrainian Pavilion at the Century of Progress World's Fair.
We're well recognized for our permanent collection. It's impossible to show everything what we have, and it's largest collection in the United States and maybe in the world of artists of Ukrainian roots.
The exhibition is called Lions, and it is at the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art through September 30th. A film about the founders of the museum premieres this weekend at the Chopin Theater. And there's more information on our website.
Coverage of the arts on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Russell and Josephine Cott Memorial Charitable Trust, enhancing services, quality programs, and capacity building for agencies serving seniors.
Finally this evening, we turn the clock back about 24 hours. That's when longtime Chicago Tonight, the Weekend Review host Joel Weissman had his big moment on the baseball diamond. White Sox chairman Jerry Reinsdorf invited Joel to throw out the ceremonial first pitch in honor of his 40 years hosting the Weekend Reviews. Joel stepped down as host in January. In his words, Reinsdorf and the White Sox wanted to say thanks for Joel's longstanding commitment to the Chicagoland community and to commemorate his storied broadcast career. Playing catcher for the evening was White Sox pitcher Lucas Giolito, who deftly grabbed Joel's pitch, as you just saw. It came in just a little bit low, but very nearly over the plate. Congratulations, Joel, and a great job. And if you're curious about Joel's reaction to his major league pitching debut, you can head to our website for the scoop. And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily e-alert, and please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Astronomers detect a mysterious radio signal from space, and why sleeping in the dark is good for your health. Robbie Amias returns to explain all. And the critical service for helping homeless youth lock down a better future. We leave you with a Jelly Roll Morton piece performed by American ragtime artist, pianist that is, Chicagoan Reginald Robinson. He performed at the IIT event Amanda Vinicky covered earlier. Morton wrote this piece, Mama Nita, for his wife, Anita Gonzalez, in 1924. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Phil Ponce, and I thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, serving Chicago as a personal injury law firm since 1984.